Hi, everybody. Welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe. I'm sure you already saw this, but last Sunday, August 16th, President Oaks was in Brazil to dedicate the Belo Horizonte Brazil Temple, the same day as the Cleveland, Ohio Temple, which I did a very interesting video about that, which we're going to touch on later on in the video. But while President Oaks was in Brazil, he was interviewed by the local news, and he had some interesting things to say that I've put on my spreadsheets. You can watch this video yourself. It starts out in Portuguese, but when it gets to the part where he's being interviewed, it's in English. So you just have to fast forward to that part. Before I share what he said in that interview, I want to highlight this article by Deseret News titled, "This country now has the second largest population of Latter-day Saints," which shocked me because it feels like my entire life, the country with the second largest population of Latter-day Saints has been Mexico. I feel like it's been like that for a long time. I've been keeping track of this well before I started my channel. I've always been interested in church stats. I think a lot of people are. But I think at least going back to when I was in junior high. So like in the 90s. Um, I can't verify that, but I feel like it's always been the case that Mexico was always in the number 2 spot. But it looks like that just changed. Okay, this is an article by Tad Walsh. President Dallin H. Oaks deliberately chose Brazil as the first international destination of his presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Okay, and that's worth noting too, that this is his first international trip. President Nelson did a global ministry tour in his first year. He went to 7 countries outside the United States. President Oaks, at least so far, is not doing anything like that. I think he just went for this dedication, but I'm taking note of that. I think it's interesting that it's called the Belo Horizonte Temple because that translates to beautiful horizon, which makes me think about the second coming. Hopefully, it's on the horizon along with the millennium. Hopefully, this isn't a coincidence and it has meaning as orchestrated by the Lord. But anyway, why did he travel there Sunday to dedicate a temple when he could have chosen any any of more than half a dozen other locations? One reason may be that Brazil recently surpassed Mexico as the country with the second largest population of Latter-day Saints, according to official church statistics. And then it has like the top 4 countries right here: United States, and now in the number 2 spot, Brazil, and then Mexico, and then after that, the Philippines, which is getting really close to 1 million. Once that happens, it will be one of only 3 countries outside the United States that has hit the 1 million mark. So that's exciting. Later on, church membership in Brazil has grown significantly for 5 straight years since the pandemic. Total membership in Brazil grew by about 48,000 in 2025. 12.7% of the church's growth just from Brazil. 12.7% of the church's growth. And then later, though Brazil moved past Mexico, growth in that country also remains robust. Mexico's net church membership rose by about 38,000 in 2025, or 10.1% of last year's church growth. And then the church also grew 6% in the Philippines. All right. I always like to look at this Wikipedia article that has different statistics. And in this column, it says 2025 members. So I guess that makes sense because like they like update the statistics at the end of each year. So I think this is at the end of 2025. These are the numbers. So United States, Brazil, Mexico, Philippines, and then I'm familiar with the rest of this. We have Peru and Chile. Both of those are over 500,000, and Argentina is also barely over 500,000. Guatemala, Ecuador, just a bunch of South American countries. The only countries that are not, Mexico, Central America, South America are the Philippines, and then we have Nigeria. But like all these right here going down to Canada, they're all Latin American countries. And it's interesting because I thought of something. Let's go to my spreadsheet called quotes A through Z to what's currently row 474 for New Jerusalem Lamanites. I want to read just a couple things from this and think about this as we're looking at growth in Brazil, Mexico, in South America as a whole. This is from Elder Orson Pratt, the Quorum of the 12, in Journal of Discourses. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but the first part says, "What I wish to call your special attention to now, so far as these things are concerned, is this. The Latter-day Saints in these mountains never can have the privilege of going back to Jackson County and building that city, which is to be called the New Jerusalem, upon the spot that was appointed by revelation through the prophet Joseph, until quite a large portion of the remnants of Joseph go back with us." And then later on, at the very bottom of this quote, "It will take a good while to gather all these tribes of South America. For some of them will have to come from 5 to 8,000 miles in order to reach the New Jerusalem." Okay. And then we have this more recent quote. This is in Teachings of Spencer W. Kimball, published in 1982. At this time, he was in the Quorum of the 12. "I've known people who have been promised in their patriarchal blessings that they would live to see the temple built, and some of them are dying and haven't seen the temple built," referring to the New Jerusalem. "Do you know why? In my estimation, the Lord's timetable is directed a good deal by us. We speed up the clock or we slow the hands down, and we turn them back by our activities or our procrastinations. And do you know why I think people who are actually promised that they would live to see the temple built are dying before completion of the temple? Because we haven't converted Indians in large enough numbers. Because we haven't converted Indians in large enough numbers. Never shall we go to Jackson County until we have converted and brought into this church great numbers of Lamanites." Okay. So with that in mind, we just talked about Brazil and Mexico and all these other South American countries and, Central American countries. And, we're looking at that. And we also look at what's been said recently. This is Elder Rasband. This is row 644 for South America. And this is in his April 2025 General Conference talk called Right Before Our Eyes. "Last year, I was privileged to preside at the dedication of the Mendoza, Argentina temple. In my message, I referred to Elder Melvin J. Ballard's 1926 prophecy that the work of the Lord would grow slowly for a time in South America. Quote, just as an oak grows slowly from an acorn, it will not shoot up in a day," end quote. "But thousands would join the church, and the nations of South America would become a power in the church," quote unquote. "I saw that prophecy fulfilled right before my eyes." And then we got this from Mark L. Grover, historian. This is Church News, June 18th, 2025. The name of this article, sorry. Sorry. The name of this article is "Celebrating a Century. Latter-day Saints Commemorate 100 Years in South America." South America historian and author Mark L. Grover wrote to the Church News that one of the two most important missionary events in the church was the sending of apostle missionaries to Great Britain in the 1840s and 1850s. Quote, "The second event is the evolution of the church in Latin America, beginning in Mexico in the 1870s, but later the beginning in Argentina in 1925. The growth was slow, but after 1975/1980, The expansion was so great that the growth in Latin America changed the church, Grover said. Grover said the two American continents represent 80% of the baptized membership of the church. That is crazy. 80% in what Joseph Smith described as the land of Zion, North and South America. Quote, for that reason, I believe that 1925 is a watershed event in church history, not for what happened in that year, but what occurred many years afterward. Okay, so these are the thoughts that come to my mind as even though you have one Latin American country passing up another, it just goes to show how much they're growing, though. That, like it said, Mexico is still experiencing robust growth, and I don't know, just things are exciting. And I guess we'll see what the future holds for Brazil, but I'd be pretty excited if I was Brazilian. Okay, now let's look at this interview. This is SBT News, and I have, well, let's do it like this. I have the quote right here. It's my newest quote on the row for Temple's adversary. This is both President Oaks and Sister Oaks. Okay, Leandro, the interviewer, asks, what inspired you to come to Brazil at this particular time in this moment? President Oaks, I was anxious to come to Brazil, but as the president of the church, I have the first choice. And as soon as I saw there was a temple in Brazil, I chose that one because I wanted to come to this nation and feel the spirit of the people. Sister Oaks, well, we love the people here. They're warm, they're loving, and especially we love this temple. It's the most holy of the buildings that we build. And I believe the power from this temple will fill the city. Okay, so here it is. We've talked about this before on the channel, but it seems that temples don't only affect the members of the church in that area. It seems that the temple has an actual effect on the surrounding community and city and even nation. I have more quotes I want to read about this, but it's not just, oh, look at the church, we're doing good, we're growing really fast. It's not just that. There's actual power, and it's a problem for the adversary, and it's literally changing the world. You think about the early temples in the church. Pretty early on, the church built a temple in Washington, D.C. And I realized that there had to be enough members to support it. But I think it's interesting that one of the first temples was in Washington, D.C., this nation's capital. And, one of the most important cities in the world. I don't think it was just like, oh, well, now we have enough members, and the best place to put that temple would be Washington, D.C. I'll bet the best place would have been, I don't know, in some other location, New Jersey maybe, or maybe New York, or something like that. New York probably wouldn't have been a bad choice, but Washington, D.C. Okay, so, but just hang with me. Okay, the power from this temple will fill the city. Leandro, could you share what temples like this signify in your faith and what impact they have on people's life? President Oaks, of course, I'm glad to answer that question. Temples are the culmination of our worship, and they exert a large influence on those who come to the temple. It's in the way they treat their families and their own personal lives and how they serve their country. And so every temple we build is an increase in the influence of the church on its members and on the communities in which those temples are erected. Let me read just a few more from this row, and let's think about the implications of that. Okay. Let's go to another quote from President Oaks. When he was first counselor in the First Presidency, under President Nelson. Sorry, this is from April 28th, 2024. Temples strengthen the land in which they are built, and they strengthen the people who enter them to do the work of the Lord, said President Oaks. Then I want to read this from Elder George Q. Cannon of the Quorum of the 12, Millennial Star, November 12th, 1877. Every foundation stone that is laid for a temple, and every temple completed according to the order the Lord has revealed for his holy priesthood, lessens the power of Satan on the earth and increases the power of God and godliness, moves the heavens in mighty power in our behalf, invokes and calls down upon us the blessings of the eternal gods in those who reside in their presence. There's no doubt whatever of this in my mind. And those who have engaged in this work today must certainly have felt the spirit and power of it. There has been a holy influence here. Now listen to this. As we think about new temples that are constructed, and especially temples that are built in key cities, there has been a holy influence here. Angels have been here. The presence of our Father, too, with all his faithful servants who have stood firm, steadfast, and true while they were upon the earth. And every person present who has been prepared to receive it has been filled with it. So you can see how that might be a problem for the adversary. Having so much of this presence of righteousness, angels, God the Father himself, and of course Christ. Okay, continuing, we are engaged in that great work, which will in time result in the complete overthrow of the power of Satan upon the earth. And of all those evil influences, all of that misrule and oppression, again, think about these power centers. He's talking about temples. He's talking about the building of temples and the effect that they have. And overthrowing the power of Satan, all of that misrule and oppression, and all of the wickedness that now causes earth itself to groan, and all its inhabitants to mourn. We are engaged in the work that will sweep evil from off the face of the earth and establish the reign of peace and of truth and of righteousness. I have other quotes here. Both President Hinckley and Elder Bednar note that there's always this opposition to temples, and sometimes by members of the church. They both said that. Let's see. Yeah, but the adversary has not been unmindful of it. The building and dedication of these sacred edifices have been accompanied by a surge of opposition from a few enemies of the church, as well as criticism from a few within. I find that so frustrating. There have been times where I have brought up the prospect of temples in certain locations, and there's people that come out of the woodworks and almost get angry that you're even talking about it. And they're members of the church. I recently did a thing on social media where I was like, where are some other places that the church may build temples that have historical significance? And I was thinking of what were some of the places that I was thinking of. Like now that I'm on the spot, I can't think of any of them. Like for example, Hans Mill, somewhere in or around Hans Mill. And they were just like, I don't know. It's just like there's this like passive aggressiveness that comes through, and it's like it ruffles feathers of members of the church to think about these things. It's so strange. One last one I want to read. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but this is from Church News, June 6, 2026. And this is Elder Dale G. Renlin of the Quorum of the 12. While in Davao City, Philippines, to dedicate the Davao Philippines Temple, the first house of the Lord in the Philippine island of Mindanao, Elder Renlin spoke about temples. The house of the Lord has the power to transform us to become heirs in God's kingdom, gives us the opportunity to offer ordinances of salvation and exaltation to our ancestors, and binds our families together for eternity. He taught it provides us greater access to God's power to help us in our lives. Being in the temple changes people, he said. Quote, and so as our people go out, they act as a leaven for the rest of society. And they have not just blessed their families, but they bless the nation. Our people should be the best citizens because of what they have covenanted to do in the temple. And then it goes on to talk about the leavening effect and temples. So I'm sure in many ways, having a temple in your city, in your location, has an actual effect on that location. The power of Satan and his influence and corruption and just all sorts of things. Okay. Now, in the video that I made about the Cleveland, Ohio temple, I noted that we now have modern day operating temples in these major locations, these historic sites. You have the concept of the 7 church headquarters, starting with Fayette, New York. Well, we have the Palmyra, New York temple, which is not too far from there, but the site of the Sacred Grove in Palmyra, that was in the year 2000. So we got that church headquarters, Fayette, New York, if you just think about the region in general. Here in the Kansas City area, first, we got the Independence Visitor Center, which was built to be one of the 24 temples of the 24 temple complex, but it's currently being used as a visitor center. And then in 1971. And then in 2012, we got a modern operational temple in the Kansas City, Missouri temple, which I have right here. In the background, I got my tiny 3D temples, Kansas City, Missouri temple. If you would like one, 15% off if you use the link in the description box below. And I came up with a good idea. You can get those, like they have different sizes, and the cheapest one is only $15. And Christmas is just around the corner. At least in the Davies family, it is, because we start buying Christmas presents now. And so might make for a good Christmas present for your kids, grandkids. 15 bucks. I don't know. I love these miniatures. I love them so much. And I want to collect more myself. I want to get the Kirtland Temple. I want to get the Bountiful Temple in Utah. That's the one that my wife and I were married and sealed in. I want to get the Las Vegas Temple. I want to get the Madrid, Spain Temple. And if they have it, I don't know if they do yet because it's not yet constructed, but the Barcelona Temple, because that's where I served my mission. So tiny 3D temples, 15% off. Get yourself a temple. Okay, so Kansas City, Missouri temple, it's the closest one to Independence. It covers this area, this metro area. The most the most recent temple, the Cleveland, Ohio temple. Now, we got the original Kirtland Temple in 2024, which is significant, and it is still a temple. But we have a modern temple where we do the all the ordinances in that area in Cleveland. Okay, so before last weekend, this was still like a blank box to check. We just checked it last weekend, which is really exciting. We're still waiting for a temple in Far West in Adamandayaman, Nauvoo. That was done in 2002, the reconstructed Nauvoo temple. Winter quarters in 2001. And I pointed out in that video that I made, it's interesting because this seems to have been intentionally done. Okay. You had the Palmyra, New York temple in the year 2000. The next year, 2001, the Winter Quarters temple. The next year after that, the Nauvoo temple. 3 years in a row, as though it was like a priority to get those temples done. And I think that it probably was. And then, we've only ever had one Salt Lake temple. but there's a big thing going on with it right now. I'm sure you've heard of it. The renovations that have been going on for 7 years. So, as well as other Pioneer era temples have been renovated. And then we have the BYU Jerusalem Center, which could become a temple sometime in the future. Um, like I've said before, it doesn't have to necessarily have baptismal fonts, I don't think, or even ordinance rooms, because the 24 temple complex in the New Jerusalem would have been 24 temples with different purposes. And so, if that's going to be one of the world headquarters in the millennium, and it's going to have 24 temples, maybe Jerusalem will too. And not all those temples will be temples like what we think of right now. But we got the BYU Jerusalem Center back in 1989. So you think about these key locations, and I don't think that these are just places that are significant in church history. I think that they have a future. I think that they're going to play an important part in the millennium. Nauvoo, according to Doctrine and Covenants 124, is a cornerstone in Zion. And I think that that's, again, not just something in the past because of the things that were revealed there, but I think that it has an important future. And the same thing with Winter Quarters, perhaps. Definitely, I would say with Kirtland, uh, absolutely with Independence, in, possibly Fayette / Palmyra. So you have that's been going on. And then you also have things like this where, let's go back to President Nelson. Uh, he he dedicated what seems to be a really important temple in the Rome, Italy temple. This is what he said. This is Church News, December 27th, 2019. During a historic interview in Rome, the ancient and great city where 2 millennia ago Peter and Paul preached and died, President Russell M. Nelson called the dedication of the Rome, Italy temple a hinge point in the history of the church. Why would that be? Again, there could be a few different answers to that, but I think one of those answers is the effect that temples have in the region, the city that they're in. And Rome has been a really important city in world history. And you think about a really big church that's headquartered there in the Vatican, and there may be much more significance to what happened with this temple and its dedication than what we realize. With the influence that comes from the temple. Quote, things are going to move forward at an accelerated pace, said President Nelson. The church is going to have an unprecedented future, unparalleled. We're just building up to what's ahead now. And then he met with the Pope, becoming the first prophet to have a formal audience with the head of the Roman Catholic Church. Let's see. In in this Ensign article from May 2019, it notes that for the first time in the history of the restored church, all of the members of the First Presidency and the Quorum and 12 Apostles were gathered together in one place outside of the United States, when all of them traveled to Italy for the dedication of the Rome, Italy temple in March 2019. So it does seem that something very, very, very significant happened. This is a stunning picture. And then, of course, there's that amazing picture of them in the visitor center. But I like this one. In the background, you have the Rome, Italy temple. And it's one of those temples that have only 2 spires, and one spire is shorter than the other one. That seems to follow the pattern of the Salt Lake Temple. The different steeples or spires on the Salt Lake Temple, the ones that face east represent the First Presidency, and just more generally the Melchizedek priesthood. The ones on the west side, the presiding bishopric, and just more generally the Aaronic priesthood. And we have noted that there are other temples that follow that pattern. There's a series of temples that have 6 spires, like the Washington, D.C. temple, follows that pattern. But then you have a subset of temples that have strictly two. They have two spires where one is higher than the other. And when we look at those on a map, they're all in Utah with a couple exceptions. So here's all the Utah two-spired temples. The Vernal Utah Temple, the Manti Temple, the Ephraim Utah Temple is going to have two spires. Heber Valley, Linden. By the way, there was somebody that I had met at a wedding reception recently. If you're watching this, I checked. The Linden, Utah does have one spire that's higher than the other. You have to get a good picture that shows like the sideways view, but one is taller than the other. Anyway, you have all these temples here in Utah. And then the only other two in the United States, out of all the temples that we have in the United States, the only other two are the Kansas City, Missouri temple, which is in a very, very, very significant location, and then the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania temple, where the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were signed. So, and then we were just talking earlier about Washington, D.C. So we have a six-spired temple that follows the Salt Lake Temple pattern in Washington, D.C., and then one of these special, what seems to be special two-spired temples in Philadelphia. Outside the United States, the only other two that have two spires like this are the Rome, Italy temple. Okay. And that makes sense to me. And then the one that doesn't make as much sense is this one down in New Zealand, the Wellington, New Zealand temple. The only thing that comes to mind when it comes to this one is I think about the Maori and how I need to like get into that story and research it, but I know that the Maori had like a prophecy of, I think, like a true religion being restored and messengers being sent to them. And there was like a mass conversion event. And I'm not going to read the quotes right now, but we have a number of quotes that talk about the fact that the Pacific Islanders, including the Maori, just, Polynesians in general, are descended from Hagoth, who and his people that he took on his ship, who were Nephites. Okay, Nephites. In fact, if we go back to this Wikipedia article and we sort this by the percentage of the country that are members of the church, the countries that have the highest percentage of their population that are members of the church are Tonga, Samoa, American Samoa. So, and look at these percentages. Almost 70% in the case of Tonga, 44% with Samoa, 35% with American Samoa. And then you have, I don't know how to pronounce it, Niue. It's in the Pacific, Kiribati, Pacific, Marshall Islands, Cook Islands, French Polynesia. All the top countries here, when you sort it by percentage LDS, they're all Pacific countries, at least the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The top 8 are all Pacific Island countries. And then you have one from Asia North, but then it goes back to the Pacific, and then Europe North, and then Pacific again, Asia North, South America South, South America South, and then Pacific. Why do you think that is? I think it's because these are descendants of the Nephites. So here, let's look at, I'm just curious about New Zealand. They're at 2.2, almost 2.3% members of the church. It's pretty high up there. Look, they're toward the top of the list. In fact, their percentage is higher than the United States. New Zealand has a higher percentage than the United States. The United States is at about 2%. So that is fascinating. So I don't know. Maybe that's why this temple has the special two spire pattern. You know, I don't know, but I don't think that it's just random. Like, seriously, all the other, aside from the ones that we just looked at, all the other temples are in Utah that have the 2 spires. Give me your break. All right. Well, that's all that I have for this one. I'll talk to you guys later.